Thanks everybody for taking the time out of your busy day to hang out and have a chat here. I'm looking forward to talking to you. I'm going to share some stuff that I've been learning recently in my new role at Envision. As the VP of Design Education, I've spent a lot of time talking to a number of different companies, visiting companies, talking to design leaders, and I just keep seeing patterns over and over again. As Leo was describing, I wrote about problems that I see, 7 problems that I see in design teams as they scale. And that's pretty much a universal thing. I thought it was just my experience leading design teams at MailChimp over the years, but it turns out a lot of people are dealing with the same issues. But I don't want to talk about the negative stuff today. I want to talk about the other patterns that I've seen, which are these common patterns of how design-driven companies solve problems. Share those principles with you, and we can talk about them and how they relate to what you're doing, and maybe they don't, and chat a bit more. So I'm going to see if screen sharing works, so bear with me for 1 second here. I'm going to press a button, and let's see. Let me close a few things here. All right, bear with me for 1 second. All right. All right, can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Do you see a slide that says 7 principles of product design?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I can't see you while I have the presentation open.
Yes, we can see everything.
All right, great, cool. Holler at me if something goes awry, because I'm flying blind. I'm just looking at the slides here, but.
Is it okay if I keep on mute, or do you have some sound?
Yeah, mute's fine. And by the way, Leo, I've shared a couple video links with him that he can email to you after this, and also a PDF with the slide deck and all the notes too. So don't get too caught up taking notes. But at any rate, so right now I think we're in a particularly interesting point in history with design, because software is entering basically every market. So clearly it's in media and financial technology, fintech, healthcare, education, and pretty much any other market that you can think of. And so consumers, because we've got devices with us all the time, we have persistent connections, we have this new relationship to technology that we didn't have a few years ago. I don't know if this is true in the UK, but I remember even 5-6 years ago, there were a lot of books in bookstores that were, like Microsoft Word for Dummies or Mac OS for Dummies. And, you go into bookstores and you just don't see that anymore. And my theory is that we're no longer dummies. We've become sophisticated consumers of technology and design. And that the changing landscape of consumers changes what's possible within design, within companies, but also changes the strategy, because we're no longer competing on technology. We're not competing on a feature matrix. We're competing on creating an incredible experience. And we see some bellwethers of this shift. Companies like IBM, like Google, like Salesforce, 3 companies that even 2-3 years ago, I would not have dreamed of saying these are paragons of design. These are companies that pride themselves on technology that really don't have.
We lost you. Hello.
To this organization planet, they're hiring something like 2,000 designers.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
You just get cut for a few seconds.
Okay. Yeah, so IBM is becoming the biggest design organization on the planet, and they're purchasing design companies, as is Google, as is Salesforce. So why are they making this? they're competing. Yeah.
There's someone dropping in, and every time he drops in, it cuts you for a few seconds.
Okay.
He's okay now? No. Alright. Seems good now. Hopefully it won't happen again.
Okay. Yeah. We'll cross our fingers. So these companies are competing on experience now, and pretty much every company is saying that's their competitive advantage. We think about design, product design in particular. It's actually it's really hard. It's really complicated because we're designing for multiple cohorts, as you guys well know. New customers, advanced customers, people that are interested in different topics. We've got to build products that are functional and reliable and usable. And if we're really doing great work, then those products are enjoyable as well to be competitive. So this is a monolithic problem in our industry. We have to be we have to solve really difficult problems to be competitive. And really the only way to solve those monolithic problems is to break them into smaller pieces. For an IBM or a Google or a Salesforce to buy a bunch of design companies, Capital One bought a bunch of design companies, including Adaptive Path. You can't just buy designers, and set them loose. You've got to have some sort of philosophy or vision that guides the work. Otherwise, you just get chaos. So how do we do that? How do we take these monolithic problems and break them down into smaller pieces? We do that by thinking about design principles. And as I mentioned earlier, the more I visit companies, the more I talk to companies, the more I see common principles that are being followed by those that are being very successful in their market. So that's what I want to share with you today. And we'll start with the first one. The first principle of product design is guess less. Guess less. In our industry, we move really fast, and for good reason. We want to,
Sorry, Aarron. I think your slides aren't moving, if there are any.
Oh, okay.
You're still on the IBM slide.
Okay, that's a problem. Can you see that?
Yes, hi.
All right, I'm going to do this. This is a little bit weird to have it up this way, but I think it's maybe a little bit easier to see. And I can at least see you guys now. So just curious, do you guys play the lottery? Is that a big thing over there?
Oh, yeah. Massive thing. We have
Massive thing. Okay, be honest. Raise your hand. Who has played the lottery?
everyone.
Yeah. So a lot of people. Why do we play the lottery?
Just to have fun.
We play the lottery because we feel like we can win, right? I often hear people say, well, somebody's got to win, right? So I want to tell you a story about a guy. His name is Rod Wolf. His friends call him Lightning Rod because he's been struck by lightning not once but 2 times in his life. 2 times. So once when he was 11 and later in his 20s, he was struck by lightning. Now, that sounds like this guy is incredibly lucky. I don't know if you call it lucky, but this is crazy that someone could get hit by lightning 2 times. But it's actually you have a greater chance of being the next Rod Wolf than actually winning the lottery. Winning the lottery is it's almost impossible to do. And the software design world is actually not unlike that. We see winners every day in the media. We see Ubers and Facebooks and Googles that are winning, that are making a ton of money. And if you look at venture capital, they know that is like playing the lottery. They're putting their money on a lot of chips and hoping it hits. But it's just so hard to do. So the premise of guess less is, we are moving so fast, we're optimizing for speed. Silicon Valley, the mantra is fail fast. So we try a thing, we make it, we put it out in the industry, we see how that works, we get feedback, and then we tweak it, which sounds great, but you only get one first impression, right? Can you still hear me? Someone just jumped in.
Yeah.
All right, cool. We want to, Laura Martini, she's a product designer that was working for Counsel and is now at a new medical startup. She basically summed this up perfectly. The mentality of Silicon Valley is that you win a race at the finish line, not the starting block. And so often we start a project right away. We just get to making things. We start designing, we start coding, especially in Agile, the philosophy is we should be shipping code all the time. But the problem is if we jump straight to that right away, we don't actually know where the finish line is. We don't know what we're making. So we end up producing something that may not at all be relevant to our audience. So we're basing our entire business, all of our work, on guesses, just like playing the lottery, just like standing in the field and waiting to get struck by lightning 2-3 times in a row. Braden Cowitz at the Google Ventures team, talked to him and his team, and he said something really smart. He said that when designers don't know which problems to solve, we spin our wheels, we make products prettier when we could be solving customers' needs and generating real value. So any company that's serious about design should get equally serious about listening to customers. Listening to customers, talking to them, understanding what's going on in their life and where this product fits in their life is so core to making a great product and actually shipping something that's going to be successful. So we've got to figure out ways to move fast and continue to learn. And often people think of research, of taking time to visit customers or talk to them on the phone, that this is a time-consuming thing, that it's academic, and we just don't have enough time to do that. But if we don't have time to learn about the problem, to understand the problem, then we don't really have time for success. Success becomes exponentially more difficult. In my view, we should be spending about 80% of our time on thinking about the problem and 20% on execution. So I just want to give you guys a couple simple processes, and maybe you're already doing something like this in your practice. I've seen this in a number of organizations, and the research team that I built at MailChimp over the years, we would do something like this. We would use a lot of surveys, and you can set them up to be automated so they're happening in the background, which is one of those ways to make this efficient, without slowing down a process. So you can run different types of automated surveys, like an onboarding survey and an account closing survey, because you have two customers that have a wealth of knowledge for you. People who just bought, and so you may not be able to see this, but I say bought with air quotes. So who just signed up, who just created an account, who just somehow connected with your organization, and then who just left. So those people have a wealth of knowledge to share with you. They can tell you what attracted them, what are their goals, was there something in particular, a piece of content that connected them, an opportunity, why did they leave? Was something buggy, unreliable, not what they expected? All of these things can teach you how to make a better product. And so having an automated survey running in the background that's asking can collect a wealth of knowledge to inform your team at any point. So an onboarding survey, you can send that, generally you want to send it like the day of or the day after, so people's memory is still fresh. They know why they bought, why they signed up. And account closing, if they're closing the account inside of your app, there's probably a link on that, we're sad to see you go page, that would take them over there. You're going to have much lower response rate for the account closing than the account opening, but that's okay. Those who do respond are going to give you a lot of gold. And so from these surveys, with each one, you've got a name and you've got an email address. So you can start to look at them, read them. I have spent countless hours just reading through survey responses, which sounds, probably not that attractive to a lot of people, but I find it fascinating because I just learned so much. And then you can start to find patterns and then contact these customers, get them on the phone and learn from them. You collect all of this information in one spot. More about that in a second, but talking to customers in person is, it's one of the most effective ways to learn about your current product, how to refine it, but also to find your next product. That is something that I've learned firsthand, is that I spent a lot of time on airplanes traveling to visit customers. I remember last year at MailChimp, we traveled more than 100,000 miles on 3 continents, visiting customers and watching them work. And we would see the type of hardware they use. We'd see, how they get interrupted. We'd learn about their business. We'd, learn a lot of stuff that would paint a picture for who we're designing for. And we would find new ideas for products through those conversations. It's not a person literally saying, make me this product, but you can see where their life is not as good as it could be. And the idea for a product starts to emerge. So another idea, as you get into this practice of doing research, and you've got data pulling in from various sources, from surveys, you've got notes from customer interviews, you're probably collecting some analytics that can be passed over via email to a central source. You can start to collect all this into one database that can be shared. And lots of people have been experimenting with different versions of this. In fact, I know that Digital Services, the UK government, was using WordPress at one point, and then they started to use Evernote. And at MailChimp, we used Evernote, and we would pipe everything into one location. So it's basically all the different types of research we're doing, quantitative and qualitative, into a central database. And for us, we used Evernote, not because it's a perfect solution, but because it was inexpensive and we could set that up very quickly without a whole lot of effort. So this is a powerful way to give everyone access to the insights that are being collected, not just the researchers. And I've seen that break a lot of boundaries inside of an organization. If you want to learn more about that, you can Google Connected UX. I've written about that and spoken about the mechanics of how to do that. So here's some things you can do to put the guest less principle into practice. You can set up onboarding and account closing surveys. You could set up a feedback form on your site, and the one thing I would say about that is you're going to get a lot of junk, but you will get gold in there too. It just takes a long time to sort through the noise to find the signal. You can schedule short interviews with customers. 15 minutes can teach you a lot. That can be done on the phone. You don't always have to, travel to do this. It's great if you can go visit people in person, but if you don't have time to do that, a phone interview is really powerful. Local customers is great. And then, of course, storing everything in a central location, especially in a large organization like yours, can help you disseminate those insights and help everyone have access to that data. The second principle that I want to share with you is called Story First. And the idea with Story First is that we all need a North Star to guide us. We need vision to understand why we're doing what we're doing. We focus a lot on roadmaps. Speaking for myself, what I've seen in the past in lots of organizations, but roadmaps will show you what to do and they will show you when to do it, but they don't show you why. They don't tell you why you're doing that. And that is so critical, because if we don't know why we're making what we're making, it's hard for people to work autonomously we're much more mechanical. We're working rote instead of being free creative thinkers when we have a North Star to guide us. Stanley Wood, who's a design leader at Spotify, I've spent a lot of time talking to him, and he spent a lot of time visiting so many different companies, Airbnb, Google, Facebook, basically any top company that you can think of. He has recently visited to talk to design leaders to try to find the patterns of, what are people doing? How do they run design in these organizations? And he said something to me that really stuck with me. He said, I think what's most important is you have to have a North Star or a vision set. And if people don't have that, then the mess builds up. If they don't know why they're doing what they're doing, it's hard for them to create a path and contribute their talents towards a common good, a common goal. So, creating a vision, creating a story for your product is really about answering this question. How does your product fit into the lives of your customers, the lives of others, which is quite fundamental. And we do that, we can communicate that, especially in a large organization. We could send out a Google Doc, but we've all got a million Google Docs to read, right? And that doesn't really stick with us. So how do we communicate this, especially at scale in multiple locations? How does this work? Well, it turns out that story is a mechanism that is hardwired into us because we've been telling stories around campfires, building culture, building religion. All of these constructs of society that we enjoy today come from thousands of years of storytelling. And that has trained our brains to be story super processors. We can pull out the moral of a story very quickly and easily, and we can retain that information. And there's actually science and research behind this. Dr. Jennifer Aker, who's a professor at the Stanford Business School, she's discovered that people remember information when it's weaved into a narrative 22 times more than if it were presented as facts alone. Right? So we remember that so much better. And when you're in a large organization, if you are in a leadership position, you know that you spend almost all of your day repeating to other people, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing. And if you could encode that in a story, people can consume that and retain that much more effectively. Everything good, Leo?
Yeah, I'm good. I just had a good idea. I've built you a PDF version of the presentation and just go through it.
Cool. All right. So I want to share with you guys a story about story from an organization that it's definitely doing a lot with design. Airbnb, their founder is their CEO has a design background. They're sort of the poster child of design-driven companies. And so in 2012, Brian Chesky, who's their CEO, recognized that things were going really well. Their growth chart looked like the hockey stick that you want. They had a lot of investment. There were about 200 employees, and he felt like things were going well, but he had fear that as the company scaled, they were going to become more dysfunctional and struggle to have a common vision to guide them to do great things. And so it was over the holiday break, and he was reading a book about Walt Disney, and he realized that when Disney Studios created Snow White in the late 30s, I think it was like 1939 or maybe it was 1940, which is the first full-length animated film. Disney Studios was the almost exact same size as Airbnb. And so they created something that was so revolutionary at the time because animation was really just slapstick gags. It was like Felix the Cat. It made people laugh, but it was a novelty. It was not something that was taken seriously. And Walt Disney had a vision of creating art, creating film, filmmaking history. He wanted to win an Oscar. He had high ambitions. And so they used story to get everyone in that company to work together to create Snow White. So Brian Chesky recognized that this was a very powerful tool, that at Disney Studios, they were using storyboards. They didn't invent storyboards, but they were, pioneers of putting that into practice. And so they started on a storyboard project, a big storyboard project, which guides them still today. And I don't know if you can see this, but on my screen, it's not in the PDF, but they worked directly with Pixar, some Pixar illustrators, to create storyboards of two experiences. The host experience, I want to rent out my house or my apartment, and the guest experience. And so they storyboarded every step of that process that helped them understand, how does that person feel in this situation? What are the challenges that they're confronting? That they just arrived in Los Angeles and they've got to find their way to the house. They've got to find the lockbox, unlock it, etc. And they found that as they went deeper together, they worked as a team, the whole company, to investigate each one of these steps. They started to understand that experience better, and it helped them manage and shape the organizational structure. So they are now, they have teams organized around these two experiences. So it's not the product team or the design team, it's the guest team and the host experience team, right? So they organize around these experiences, and they focus on these clear events, these moments in time. So this is one of the video links that I sent you guys that you can watch later and hear in their own words how they built this. And it still guides them today. And I think that's particularly impressive that we're 4 years later and this is still central to their space and the way that they run their organization. But you don't need to hire Pixar to produce storyboards. I mean, you can start a project with a story and create that with your phone. It's just, it's so easy to produce storyboards with a phone. If you get together as a team and think about the steps of the experience, identify those, you can grab some colleagues or friends and basically stage that experience and take some photos with your phone. Then you can dump them into iMovie on your phone. You can dump them into Keynote. You can just print them out and post them on the wall. You've got these photos. You can even produce video on your phone. I don't know if you guys have tried to do any sort of video production and editing on your phone. Turns out it's kind of amazing. I've been doing this lately, and it's really powerful. So we don't need Pixar to necessarily produce some incredible storyboards. We can do it just with a phone. And the nice thing about dumping it into Keynote or Google Slides is you can share that with a bunch of people. You can email that. If you produce a short video on your phone, you upload it to Vimeo, post that in the Slack channel, everyone gets the vision of this is what we're trying to create, folks. And that guides multiple teams, engineers, designers, mobile, etc., legal. If you're working on a larger project that will take more time, I have found that video is more useful simply because it removes layers of abstraction and helps us see and identify with that story better. And this is another link that I've shared with Leo and he'll send out to you. The team that I was leading at MailChimp a few years ago, we produced a short video that we wrote a script for and got some friends together, shot a simple video. There's no dialogue. We just put the dialogue on the screen in these little thought bubbles. And we did that in just 10 days, and we used that to guide a project that was 4 months long. So video can be a very effective storytelling mechanism, as we all know from watching TV, movies, etc. So, some things you can do to put story first. You can use sticky notes to just storyboard the product experience, the user experience. That's a great, simple place to start. identifying the key steps. And what we learned from the Airbnb story is that the further they went into each step, the more they understood what they needed to do to dial in their product for that experience. You can create a photo storyboard with your phone, stitch it together in Keynote, PowerPoint, Google Slides, whatever you use. And that's something that's so shareable where people can comment and reference as they need. You could create a short video, and it doesn't have to be high production. You can use a digital SLR camera. You could use your phone. This is easy stuff. So short videos that can help people remember things. Third principle of product design that I want to share with you is called pencils before pixels. Pencils before pixels. What I have found is that creative thinkers in various mediums, whether it's architecture, art, graphic design, print design, they follow a similar process, which is you ideate, you explore a lot of different ideas in a very wide, broad way. And then you narrow that down. Of these 50 ideas, which one is the strongest? Can I narrow it down to 5, down to 2, down to 1? But in the software design world, I find that so many companies, they go straight to the computer. And there's a problem with that because the computer is powerful. It helps us work through things very quickly, but it creates perfection. So, pixels are perfect. The color is vivid. We're aligning everything to a grid, and we start to get focused on the fiddly bits and not on the concept. And when we create perfection, we fall in love with perfection. We fall in love with that idea. So we don't go wide at the beginning of the creative process. We go narrow, and then we refine far too soon. So that's why pencils before pixels is a very important thing. This is a former colleague of mine, Federico Holgado. He has a background in industrial design, and in his training, he was drawing all the time. And there was a lot of critical thinking and debate that went on in that program. And that was just sort of absorbed into his design process. He told me that many times my sketches focus on big things and leave out lots of smaller details. You see squiggles for text and rectangles that represent buttons and images, but sketches don't have to be perfect or beautiful. They just need to get your ideas across. And that's the thing that turns a lot of people off from sketching. If you don't have a formal design background, when you hear the word sketch, you might think of someone with a beret sipping a cappuccino in a Parisian cafe, perfectly rendering and shading some lovely piece of architecture. That's not the type of sketching I'm talking about. I'm talking about like scribbles on a piece of paper that can illustrate an idea. If you can draw a rectangle-ish, if you can write some text, you can pretty much draw a UI. And you can sketch out an idea for the experience that you want to create. And sketching, what's great about it is it's not just for the domain of the sacred domain of designers. Anyone can be involved. And that's something I've seen with organizations. Google Ventures, for example, they have CEOs, they have investors, they have lawyers, content experts who do not have a design background, sketching with them, ideating, exploring ideas on paper. It might take a little bit of coaxing up front, but they break the ice and people will do it. And what you get is shared ownership. Everyone's working together to try to solve the problem. You get multiple perspectives, not just the designer's perspective, but the engineer's perspective, the lawyer's perspective, the CEO or whoever's in charge of the business objectives, their perspective. We can sketch together. I talked to Aarron Irizarry, who leads UX at NASDAQ, and he said that sketching is a central part of everything that they do. He said that they get everyone together to sketch, so they have shared ownership and vision. And what I have found is that when people can do this, when they involve people from all domains that are involved in a product, if they can get them involved early on in the ideation phase, you avoid a lot of the political conflict that can come later. If you own a project early on and keep that quiet until later, and then other people who have to plug in and support that, they don't see it until later. There's this feeling of, why wasn't I consulted? Why did you not ask for my opinion here? And that creates a lot of political negativity, and it's very hard to produce great products in that scenario. So getting people involved early on is key. The great thing about sketching is that it's something that can be done very fast. Things are not precious. Sketches are lo-fi, and having the right fidelity at the right time is key. I'm just curious, have any of you guys here who are, anyone here that's a designer, produced a design comp early on in a project and then shared that with an engineer? I'm curious what the reaction is from the engineer. Nobody?
Yeah, it's like you can't do it, yeah?
You can't do it. Right. Okay. So that's not uncommon, as you hear that they shut it down, say, it's too complicated, we can't do it. Anybody else? So, what's that? What I have seen is no is actually related to why wasn't I involved. When you show an engineer a complete comp and they weren't involved in the ideation phase, there's this feeling that you've already solved the problem and I'm not part of that solution. I'm just the execution. I'm downstream. And that's where the no comes from, is I'm not involved in that process. But if they were involved early on, you get a lot more yeses than you get nos. So the right fidelity, the right time is important. When people see a sketch, they know that we're just working through the idea here. There's still opportunity for people to contribute their thoughts and give their feedback. Todd Dominy, who's design director at MailChimp, he sums it up very well. He has had experience with this. He says pixels freak people out. That when it looks so perfect early on, they have this feeling of like, okay, so I guess this is what we're making. And that can be dangerous. So some things you can do to put pencils before pixels. You can just start sketching early and often. And you can do that in a sketchbook. I actually recommend that you just get a stack of A5, because you can make a drawing and you can give that to someone, you can post it on the wall, or if it's not great, it's not a good idea, you can put it out of its misery in the recycle bin. So, but if it's in a sketchbook, it's permanently there, it's a lot harder to share. So, just loose paper is often the best bet. There are a lot of people that believe that early ideation should not be done with mechanical pencils and fine liner pens. Should actually be done with a fat marker, because you can't get into detail. You can only get high-level concepts with that limitation. I find that interesting and fascinating. I don't necessarily follow that on my side of things, but just keeping in mind we don't want to get too involved in the details early on is important. Getting people together to sketch is really important. As I mentioned, you can avoid political challenges. There's a great exercise that Google Ventures uses. It's called Crazy Eights. Take 2 sheets of A5, fold them into quarters. So you fold it once, fold it twice, and you get two sheets with 4 boxes, so a total of 8 panels. And you get a group of people together, you give them 5 minutes to draw 8 solutions to a problem. So everyone draws separately and they're quiet when they do that. And the reason we would do that versus drawing it together on a whiteboard is that there's a lot of research that shows we produce more ideas and of better quality when we work individually and then we share those and talk through those together than if we were to kind of brainstorm together. There's another technique called sketchboarding that was developed by Adaptive Path that I really like. And it's sort of a detailed process that I can't go into here, but if you go to YouTube and you search for sketchboarding, you'll see a wonderful instructional video that shows you how to do that. That brings us to principle number 4, fast feedback. So to create great products, we have to learn very quickly, and that's one of the great advantages we have creating software versus creating hardware. It takes more time to produce hardware. It has to be just so to be manufactured. But we can produce software very quickly. We can prototype very quickly. I work for Envision, and that's really what we're all about, is we make software that helps people prototype very quickly. You can produce screens, upload them, connect them together, animate them. And at this point, we can produce prototypes that are so high fidelity that people using them think that it's the real thing. So when you have a high fidelity prototype, you get high fidelity feedback. You can deploy that to a phone and watch a customer use that phone remotely. You get, video of screen capture of their face while they're using the product. So we can prototype quickly and we can learn quickly and get feedback to make products that are more tailored to the customer experience we want to make. That's exactly what Uber does. I talked to Molly Nix, who's a product designer over there, and what they do is they produce these high fidelity prototypes, and they're really just pictures connected together. They do it through Envision. There are a number of tools out there, of course. And then they deploy them globally because they've got a global audience. So she's in San Francisco and they want to test with some drivers in San Francisco, but they also want to test with some drivers in India and in Europe and lots of different locations. So they don't have the time to build out that product, but they want to get feedback before they develop and deploy. And this is the way they do it. They produce these high fidelity prototypes very quickly. And I know that you have created a really incredible pattern library design system that you guys follow, right? And that gives you a huge advantage when you're producing prototypes, as you may already know. When you've got these components pre-built, you can produce a prototype very quickly, put together 8-10 screens, stitch them together in Envision or some other tool, and you've got a high fidelity prototype before lunchtime, which is phenomenal. Again, Aarron Irizarry at NASDAQ, they had a lot of design debt and a lot of technical debt, and they wanted to create a more unified experience. And they ended up doing an inventory of every UI, every button, every menu, every form, and built a pattern library so they could have a unified experience, more efficient code, etc. But one byproduct was that they were able to prototype so much faster. And once you have these prototypes, we can start to get feedback from customers. And a lot of times, design companies or just companies skip this step because they feel like it's time consuming. How are we going to get all these people to test this and get this feedback? It's something that can be done really fast. Example like Molly Nix from Uber, they deploy it and they get feedback directly, within a day or two from people all over the world. And you don't need to test with 20 people. It turns out that you only need to test with about 5 people. You're going to get 90% of the salient points of feedback from 5 tests. And that data comes from Jacob Nielsen, who's this old school usability testing guru, who's done a lot of research and discovered that 5 usability tests is going to get you 90% of the way there. Another technique that I find fascinating that I have not used personally in running teams, but talked to a colleague of mine, her name's Lindsay Campbell. She set up a Slack channel and has invited lots of our customers, who are particularly avid customers that use Envision a lot. And because we produce prototypes in Envision and Envision prototypes have a URL, she can just
paste that URL into a Slack channel and get customer feedback super fast from this stable of customers right away. So, things you can do to get fast feedback. You can build high fidelity prototypes very quickly. I used to do it with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, JSON files. It was crazy. Now we do it in an hour or less with current tools. You can use your prototypes as you design it. That sounds trivial, but that will teach you a great deal. Put your prototypes in front of your colleagues and get their feedback right away. Building a design system, which takes a lot of time. I'm impressed that y'all have already thought about that and you've already done that, invested. That pays dividends for such a long period of time and helps prototype quicker. Test your prototype with 5 people and you're going to get incredible feedback early on that makes your launch that much more successful. And you could consider setting up a Slack channel with customers. 5th principle, show and tell. So I have visited a lot of design schools and I've visited a lot of design companies. And I've noticed that there is a stark difference between the two. In design school, for instance, the Stanford D School, I was there lecturing a couple years ago, and yesterday I was at Georgia Tech lecturing. And what I see in design schools is a mess. I see a mess. I see stuff all over the walls. I see washi tape and scissors, and I see computers, and I see chairs and furniture pushed about. And then I go to startups, like Airbnb or Uber or any number of startups. And I see beautifully painted murals, lovely snack bins. I see espresso machines. I see perfection, but I don't see the work. And in those situations, I'm left wondering, what are the values here? What's important? So the mess, the creative chaos that's at the Stanford D School or Georgia Tech, this is a space where students are exploring a lot of ideas very quickly. It's a culture of feedback. It's a place where students get feedback on a regular basis. But in companies, so many of our ideas are locked in aluminum boxes with glowing Apple logos. And this is much more difficult to get feedback. And if you talk to any designer, almost any designer, what do you want from your job, your new job, your current job? Rarely do they say, I want more money. They almost always say, I want a place where I can grow. And the way that we grow as designers, as engineers, as employees doing any sort of discipline is through feedback. So we want to create a culture of feedback. How we do that is we get the work out on the walls where a lot of people can see it. George I, who runs a studio called Greater Good Studio, they have built a system around this. They've built these physical spaces where they can post their work. And he says, our work is plastered and posted all over the walls of the studio. Not finished things, but notes, photos, and artifacts of what we're working on. Things are messy. Over time, we see projects unfolding as they're posted, and we can give each other feedback along the way. So getting that work out in the open starts to bring other people into the process. You leave Post-it notes and some pens nearby, and you'll be surprised you might get feedback from people who are not designers. I've gotten incredible feedback from accountants who have looked at a UI that I designed and given me some feedback, observations that I had missed. Also, part of show and tell is staying connected with others. So it's about operationalizing design, knowing where a project is in your process, and then being able to see that work and critique it, having critical discourse. And that's what doesn't happen when everything's locked into the computer. We don't have critical discourse. Maybe you already do stand-ups. These are daily stand-ups, a meeting where you answer the 3 questions. What did you do yesterday? What are you doing today? What is holding you back? What are your roadblocks? And this is really meant to just sync up on projects. And in a large organization like yours, that's essential. Smaller organizations, stand-ups can be less frequent, but large organizations, you probably have to do them daily. I would recommend doing them in the afternoon because the morning time is when our minds are freshest, clearest, and most creative. So making that sacred time for doing great work is good. After you eat lunch, you're a little sleepy, so standing up and having a meeting brings your energy back up. We have stand-ups on a regular basis, but we do it remotely. I don't know if you know this, but Envision is an entirely distributed team. A number of our designers are actually in London, and but they do stand-ups remotely through Envision. They show work, they have screen sharing and so forth, and that's part of their process all the time. Some designers are in Australia, in the US, so it's something that can happen even if you're working remotely. In design reviews, this is core. This is essential to doing great work, is producing work, presenting work. Design is not just about making things, it's also about talking about things, especially in an organization as big as yours. You've got to be able to present those ideas, share them, and get feedback. There is an art to running an effective design review. Getting the right people involved. It's not just other designers, that is important. But there are domain experts. It could be a customer support person, a lawyer, a project manager, an engineer, an executive. People that have perspective on that project that can help you see it with fresh eyes. It's great to bring those people into design reviews on a regular basis. One, so they stay up to date with what's happening, but two, so you don't surprise them at the end of the project with something they didn't expect. In a design review, instead of just saying like, here's the work, what do you think? You need to frame the problem. What are you trying to learn from this? For instance, you might be trying to figure out if this onboarding sequence that you're designing is apparent and fluid. Does it take into account all the things that need to happen? Maybe you're looking at a style. Does this style feel appropriate for our brand? Frame the problem and be clear what you want from the people that are participating. And instead of having the designer drive it, designers often feel compelled to defend themselves, to explain it all. I think it's best if designers just say, here's what I'm trying to get, and then just don't say anything else. Just open your ears, not your mouth. And let a facilitator drive the conversation. Facilitator can take notes and pass that over to the designer, but the designer should really just take that opportunity to listen and not over-explain, because you'll rob everyone of their fresh eyes that they bring to the work. So, things you can do to put show and tell into practice. Create space to post your work. Adjust the studio. Not a gallery of finished work, but it can be messy. Things that are in progress, that are in flux, that still need to be figured out. You can run regular stand-ups. In the afternoon is good, so you can stay synced up. And then regular design reviews. When should these happen? Pretty much all the time. It's not just at the beginning, just at the middle, just at the end. You kind of know as a designer when you've got a complete thought and you're ready for the feedback, but often is important. Invite experts into design reviews to get fresh perspectives on your work, and then run your design reviews in a very structured way. With the facilitator framing the problem, you don't want it to just run wild on you. Getting to the end here. Number 6 is lateral design. I have noticed that, and this is something I need animation to present here, but I want you to imagine a series of cups that have water in them. And you start on the right side and you pour some water into the next cup. And you pour some water into the next cup. And you pour some water into the next cup until you're all the way to the left. And you pick that up and you pour it to the third cup, and vice versa. And so the water starts to move from vessel to vessel in a very nonlinear way. It's passing back and forth. This is the idea with lateral design. With Agile, there's a core concept of cross-functional teams where you have designers and engineers and a product manager, maybe a researcher involved in a single team. And the idea is that if everyone's involved simultaneously, we avoid a vertical relationship and we have a lateral relationship. So in theory, we are on equal footing as peers. Design and engineering and product, they are on equal footing. And that's a structure that is commonly referred to as EPD, engineering product design. And a byproduct of working together simultaneously instead of vertically is that we create respect. So when you have a scenario that a designer completes a design and then passes that to an engineer to execute, as you all pointed out earlier, the engineer says no, their dukes are up instantly. They've got this guard of trying to stop this thing from happening. And that's oftentimes because they're left out of that process. But when engineering and design can happen at the same time, we've talked about some of these techniques already, sketching together early on, ideating together early on, building and designing simultaneously, passing ideas back and forth instead of in a very linear process. It's not all design, all engineering, ship, and do it again. It moves in a very non-linear way where a designer could produce something, an engineer could be making something, modifying what that designer made with new perspective, passing that back to a designer to rethink. So it's collective work on the same idea. And respect is a byproduct, and that's so essential because you can't make great products if you don't have an elegant dovetailing of technology and design, of the way a thing functions and the way it feels. We expect to make great products that will do what people want them to do and make them feel something, have this great experience. But if we don't have that built into our organizational structure, it's impossible to actually make that. Jeff Gotthelf, who wrote a book, Lean UX, it's a great read and very influential, very much focused on Agile and that thinking. In that, he talks about the way that we measure what we make, and that being a very important thing. He said that many companies build lists of features and then ask teams task them with building those lists. When the features launch, the team is rewarded for completing their work. There's no reward that's given for the feature actually solving a business problem, only for deployment. So what he's describing here is a problem that when teams are measured by outputs, I made a thing, I made 10 things, and we get a bonus from that, or we get paid, or we get evaluated on how many things we made, not on did we move the needle, did we bring in more customers, did we make it easier to onboard. That's an outcome versus an output. Is that distinction clear? That's an important part of cross-functional teams and lateral design, is that we're focused on creating an outcome of changing user behavior, of shaping the experience, affecting that experience, not just making stuff and putting it into the world. Things you can do to put lateral design into practice. If you're not already doing this, you can start small because it doesn't have to be a big organizational shift. You can choose a small project with a clear deadline, and you can build a small team with designers, developers, product managers, and researchers. I would like to say something about that I have seen a lot of companies suffer when there's a lone designer on the team. If it's only one designer, maybe there's 5 engineers, which is pretty typical, a 1-to-5 scenario ratio. Designers feel on an island. They feel outnumbered. They feel like they have to, that they're measured by a different set of values than what makes sense for their work. Design is qualitative more than it is quantitative. Engineering tends to be more quantitative than qualitative. And so designers find themselves not growing and feeling dissatisfied with their work. Slack has a different approach with their lateral design cross-functional teams. They pair designers together. So you've always got someone, if you're stuck, to get feedback, to explore ideas, to help you get unstuck. help you communicate your design decisions too. I think that's a very important thing that will be a hot topic going forward in the next couple of years as we try to figure out organizational design. Yeah, and if this stuff works out, you know, when you have a small project with success, sharing that with the company, you know, people know about success, they want to replicate success. And that brings us to number 7, the last of the 7 principles, which is break the black box. So this one is particularly important for you because you're a very large organization. And by necessity, you'll have much fewer generalists and more specialists. You have very specialist teams, and that creates silos and that creates distance. Communication is more difficult at this point. So the idea with breaking the black box is that, you know, in a small company where you've got only a few people, design can thrive. And the same is true for engineering, that people can easily peer into that project, that the work that's being done, and get a sense for where it is, why it's being made the way it is, what are the values, what are you trying to accomplish. But as a company grows, its scales, design is so much less visible. And so people don't know what you're doing, they don't understand what you're doing. If they don't, they can't value what you're doing. So if design is not visible, it's no longer powerful. And if it's not visible, you don't have a place at the table. You're not involved early on in the process. You're downstream, you're handed things, you're decorating. That's a much less satisfying work experience. That will definitely affect the happiness, your happiness day to day. So this is something we don't necessarily think of as critical to doing great design work and creating great products, but sometimes we have to get away from our computer. It's not enough to just sit in front of our computer and push pixels and design screens. We've got to get away and get to know people. We've got to have coffee with folks, engineers who might be building your next design, you know, someone who's doing QA testing, maybe a customer support person, a lawyer, any number of people. The more people you get to know, the more social capital you have, and the more that you're building inroads into your work. So people start to understand what you're doing, and they start to understand and respect design. Julie Zhu, who's the VP, product design VP at Facebook, she's been there since they were like 20 people, and now they're, I don't know, tens of thousands of people. Huge campus, there's so many people there. So she's grown a lot as a design leader over the years. She said that the graph of impact tends to correlate with how many people you need to work effectively with. And once I realized this, I started to see my interactions with other people differently. It was no longer about winning battles and proving that I was right, but about developing stronger collaborative relationships. And that is something that designers often miss because we're so in love with our craft. We want to, you know, become a better designer, make more things. But in a large organization, it turns out to make great work, to actually ship great work, you have to get to know other people. You have to build trusting relationships with other people because there is a graph of influence. There are a lot of people that will have a touch point in your work that can make it or break it. So we've got to actively create inroads, get to know a lot of people. I talked earlier about design reviews and inviting experts in. You know, this is a great way to bring people into the design world and make your work visible to them. Laura Martini, she said that she often invited influential people in the company to her team's design reviews so that their work would be very visible to everyone. My team was a little nervous about showing their work early on to the company leaders, but I knew it was important to do. So it can be a scary thing of showing work that's unfinished, that's really half-baked, to people who have a lot of influence. But the more you do that, the more your work becomes visible. Things you can do to break the black box. Get away from your desk and start building relationships. That's so essential. And this is really not design advice. This is just, survival in a large organization. It's just essential to what we all have to do. Invite stakeholders to design reviews so they can see what you're working on. I mentioned earlier getting design out of your MacBook and onto walls so people can see the work. It's an asynchronous thing that you don't have to be present for them to start to see what's happening with your department. They can just walk by and catch a glimpse. And then I recommend avoiding big reveals where you've baked the whole thing and then you say, ta-da, here it is. Instead, get people involved early on. I mentioned that can create political issues. Why wasn't I consulted? It can create issues where you're so invested in the design that the feedback you get, you can't really take because you're already committed to this pathway. You're so far down the road. So those are the 7 principles that I wanted to share with you, things that I see happening in lots of design companies. I'm happy to answer questions and talk with you about what's on your mind, how are things working at the BBC.
Pencils Before Pixels one, I kind of sense a bit of kind of romanticism behind the kind of low-tech solutions to things. I just wondered if you ever see a time when the computer becomes high enough resolution that the kind of low-tech solutions become imperceivably different, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good thing to point out, and it's not that I'm romantic about low tech solutions. Okay. It's that what I see. So this is a principle. It's not like a thing that you must do. In fact, I've seen some people who are so creative thinking is and critical thinking is so built into their thought process that it doesn't really matter where they start. They're going to go wide no matter what. So, for example, I hired a guy from Apple last year, and at Apple he would have to do like 50 explores, is what they called it. So if he was going to work on a UI for the new Apple TV, he had to do like 50 or 60 screens of what this possibly could work, what it could look like. And that's essentially, it was fast on the computer, the tool was not a hindrance to the ideation process. That is what's behind the idea of Pencils Before Pixels, is that I watch so many people jump straight into Sketch and they produce a thing. It's one idea. Maybe there's 2 ideas, and that's it. And that just puts us at such a significant disadvantage where we're not exploring things deeply. You look at any discipline, like Frank Gehry, for example, and his studio. I mean, they produce so many models, so many sketches. Their creative process is all about discovery. And in software design, where people are focused on the tool, when the romance is around the tool, not the idea, that's where we miss out. That's what I want to say with that principle.
Okay. Yeah, that clarifies that. Thank you. Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of people use Paper, the app, on their iPad. iPads are a really great way to, explore ideas very quickly. But there's something about Paper where it's just like so concrete and ephemeral at the same time that is really great. Easy to share. It's not fiddly to share it. You just hand it to a person. That's useful.
I personally, sorry, can I just say what I believe? I personally believe that the computers haven't really caught up yet with our low-tech solutions, and I think they will get there. I'm kind of a futurologist. I don't know. I like technical solutions to low-tech things, and I think that eventually, I hope that eventually they'll get to a stage where we can use them as ideas to facilitate creativity in a way which the low-tech solutions currently enable us, and they'll have the advantage of having things about them which allow us to create even more inspired solutions to things. I'm just thinking specifically in the virtual reality world at the moment, there's ways of painting in 3D. And that seems, to me, that unlocks a huge potential because it adds a whole different spatial dimension in kind of articulating what you want to achieve with a particular design. So that's quite exciting. yeah, so that's just what I was thinking with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anything else? Yeah?
Yeah.
You want to come up here?
Can you hear me? Or should I come
I
closer?
can.
Yeah.
Cool. So it's about design reviews. You said a lot of things which I all liked, but some of them I'm not sure how they work together. So, for example, the idea that in design review you should kind of shut up and listen. You're not here to kind of convince anyone. But on the other hand, kind of like inviting people who've never seen your design, who are from a different team. How does that work? Because sometimes you can like they might not know anything about the UI, and you've been working on that little button, and obviously they're not going to have a clue what you're doing, and that's kind of spotless. So how do you kind of bridge that gap?
Yeah, and so that's a valid point, that who you choose is important. That person should have some domain expertise or some relationship. If they're just cold to the project, they don't know anything about it, the moderator should frame that. That's part of framing the problem, of saying, here's what we're trying to do, here's what we have to work with, here are the technical limitations and opportunities, here's the customer base, etc. So framing the problem so they understand it at least on a high level is important. And they might ask questions like, have you thought about doing blah? And it's appropriate for a designer to respond to that and say, I did try that. Actually, I tried that out, and the reason why it didn't work is, because of this. That's a pretty typical thing that I've seen in design reviews, especially with designers who are really good critical thinkers, who are doing wide exploration early on. They've got 40 or 50 different iterations, and I give them feedback, and they're like, yeah, I tried that, and here's why that didn't work. And it does offer perspective. So it's not that a designer can't say anything, but I've been in so many critiques, and I've been the subject of critique, and I've been the critiquer, and it's just so hard as a designer to not defend your baby. And that's really what shuts down our ears, and we stop listening to that feedback. I think if we can keep it, focused on facts as much as we can, and not get lost in our deep-seated opinions as the designer trying to defend our work, that's the aim.
Cool. Thanks.
Cool. So for the NBA, do you have any questions?
Hi, yeah, from MBH.
Yeah.
Sorry, the monitor's kind of that way, so you can't see the rest of the audience over here. I was wondering, founding UX at MailChimp, everything that you know now, what would, if you were coming to a new company and you were founding design there, what would be the things that you would kind of start with going to that place?
Yeah, so the one thing that I think was really critical to our success and taking off, because when I started, I was employee number 4. We had, a few thousand customers. It was pretty small, brand new. So I was hired just a few months after the lead engineer, and he's a super talented engineer, and we were hired basically at the same time to be a pair. Here's the engineer, here's the designer. And he wasn't a designer, but he had a lot of respect for design. He didn't have great aesthetics or great style, but he just knew that his work without design was not going to be as successful. So he knew that what I brought to the table was of value. And on the other side, flip side, I had been, doing some PHP and database stuff, and I wasn't necessarily good at it, but I knew the world, and I knew that stuff, doing it well was hard, and was really important. So we began with this mutual respect between design and development that affected every hire after that. So people that we hired, designers would have a respect for engineering. They'd be a bit hybrid in some situations, and engineers would have respect for design. Not all the time, it didn't always work, but generally speaking, that relationship that we had affected
the relationships between the teams. And so if I were at a new company starting things up, that is something that I would pay close attention to early on, is what is the relationship of those leaders, because that's going to trickle down to everybody else.
A question around the whole testing with 5 users.
Yeah.
How do you convince developers, product owners that testing a prototype with 5 users is enough to give evidence to suggest that that's the thing you should build if they've not heard of, or if they're not familiar with Jakob Nielsen and his research? How do you convince those other stakeholders that 5 people is enough for us to build this thing?
Yeah, is it statistically significant, et cetera? One, there's a great article. There's a very detailed research paper about this that can be shared, and it's got a lot of statistics. It's got charts. It's something that an engineer could grok. So I would share that from Jakob Nielsen, and it's the Nielsen-Norman group. If they don't know Jakob Nielsen, they probably know Don Norman, Design of Everyday Things, Apple. I mean, these people are the canon of design thinking. Showing them that is showing them 5 videos or letting them do it in person is great. If they're skeptical, test 8, test 10, and just keep track of, these are the things that we found. What did you find in the last 5? And you can just demonstrate it. You can recreate Jakob Nielsen's findings if you needed to. I would say that seems a little strange to have to go to those lengths to convince someone that this is the right thing to do. It's actually, I find it a little frustrating that we don't necessarily question engineers' expertise on their domain, so why would they question our expertise on our domain? But that's a chip.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Aarron. Thanks for the talk. It's Sam here from Salford. Really interesting talk, the seven principles of design. I'm just wondering, as you are the VP for Envision, the design product, you get a lot of kind of organizations, startups and stuff plugging into Envision. Is there any kind of things that you've seen or stories that you know of from other companies, organizations, startups or small groups who are doing things differently? Things that are a little bit outside the box, the 7 principles that you talked about, things that we could learn, or even mistakes, like common mistakes or big mistakes that organizations are making that we can learn from.
So other things that companies are doing that are beyond the 7 principles. One thing that's not in there that I debated, which is the idea of adding personality to design. The reason why I didn't add it in there is because I wrote a whole book about that on designing for emotion. But that's definitely something I've seen, that companies that make great products, there's creating a joyful experience or creating an emotionally engaging experience. They think about the personality of the product. They think about emotional design and shaping that. And I definitely see that a lot more in startups than in larger companies, because it's just a little bit harder to sell at a larger scale, and especially when you're kind of further along in your journey. It's a little bit easier to shape that when you're smaller. Mistakes, I think that there are tons of them that people make. Ideas that they're not well informed. I think that guess less principle, it's no accident that that's number 1, because I think that that's the biggest mistake that people make is, they think they've got a big idea, but they don't actually test it. They don't actually, get to know customers, build a prototype, put it in front of customers early on. They operate on a lot of assumptions. And to a certain degree, if you're creating a new business, there are assumptions that are, you're going to take risk, and that's going to happen. But there's a lot of stuff that can be learned early on and tested early on. In terms of things that people are doing differently with Envision, I don't know off the top of my head. I know that people are actually prototyping, deploying Envision prototypes to hardware scenarios. I don't know a lot about that, but I think that's fascinating that there are folks that are doing that. I feel like maybe TiVo is doing that. Another thing that I didn't mention, but an interesting thing that I heard from Netflix, they do something called mountain testing where, when you're operating in an agile environment, everything's very iterative and not so much innovative anymore. So when you've got a huge customer base, how do you take a big leap and step away from just iterating on a roadmap? So what they do at Netflix is that it's basically a separate cycle where they produce, they ideate, come up with interesting new ideas that are a big departure, a new concept, and then they build that thing, build a prototype, or even build it out to a certain level of fidelity, and they mountain test it where they choose a small targeted segment of customers and deploy that thing to them, letting them know this is something we're exploring. So mountain testing, we're going to the mountaintop and finding a new thing, and we let a few people test it and see how things work. I think that's fascinating. It's a cool way that fits into fast feedback, learning new things. But this idea of iteration versus innovation, this is a common theme, a common problem I've heard in a lot of companies.
I've got a quick one. Why not? Hi, Aaron. You mentioned hiring people, so and I've condensed this really nicely for you. 3 things you look for when you're hiring someone new, a new designer.
So I'm a big believer that hiring, we often focus on skills. Do they know Sketch? Do they know Photoshop? Can they write code, etc.? Those things are pretty easy to evaluate, and we do need to look at those things. But if you think about if you've ever had to fire someone, or you've seen someone you work with get fired, or perhaps you've been fired yourself at some point in your life, it's almost always because of a soft skills situation. Poor communication, interpersonal skills, saying inappropriate things, not being adaptable to a new position, changes in the company, etc. So these soft skills are what I believe we need to focus on in the hiring process. Things like adaptability are something that I look for. I look for a combination of humility and confidence that, how does the candidate treat others when they come in to visit? And I try to make a day-long visit so they get time to hang out with people. It's very hard to fake your way through an entire day. It's relatively easy to fake your way through an hour. So, a lot of this comes out through casual conversation. People will just kind of tell you about their work and their ideas and their values. They'll often tell you like what they're interested in. You can read a lot from that. I've actually written something about this. It's called Hire People, Not Skills. And I go through each one of the things that I look for when I hire.
Cool.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a good day.